much, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move that the House do agree with the committee in the said report. I also request Honorable John Jogona Kawajiko from Kiaba to second the motion for agreement with the report of the Committee of the Whole House.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a member of Committee, Budget and Appropriation Committee, I second.
Honorable members, I now propose the question that this House do agree with the report of the Committee of the Whole House on its consideration of the county government's additional allocations number 2 bill of Senate number 4 of 2022. Yeah. Will as many of that opinion say aye? Will as many of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. I call upon the mover. Mover to proceed to third reading.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And just for the record, and to put perspective, the matter in question was in regards to the construction of headquarters for 5 counties, which originally never had any premises to inherit, and especially from DC's offices or offices that existed before. The bill, as it came from the Senate, Madam Speaker, proposed that 4 counties were to receive conditional grants in that regard, because this construction of headquarters have been ongoing. One of the counties had been left out, Madam Speaker. It was the feeling that we also incorporated, but also, Madam Speaker, procedurally, we thought also that we may delay other counties and delay disbursement of other funds, because as procedure is, this kind of a bill, it came from the Senate, came to our committee, then of course came to the plenary, and Madam Speaker, any alteration again would make this bill go back to the Senate, and if there is no agreement, we would actually proceed to mediation. Madam Speaker, with that in mind, Senate is proceeding for recess today, and therefore it will not have been proper to delay all the other processes and disbursement because of the rearrangement of the said funds. There was no additional funds. Madam Speaker, it was just rearrangement, but of course, it was subject to Article 114 of the Constitution, Madam Speaker, and having all that in mind, it would disenfranchise the other counties by the matter of delays. And therefore, Madam Speaker, it was important for me to put that to record and perspective so that we are all on the same page. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the county government's additional allocation, number 2 bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2022, be now read at that time. I also request the majority leader, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, to second.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to second. And Honorable Speaker, let me just mention that this additional county allocations bill is quite critical, especially for our counties, and many of our counties across the nation are waiting for funds, and especially those that relate to donor funds and counterpart funding from the government of Kenya. And as I indicated yesterday, about 5 billion shillings is GOK money, and about close to 17-point-something billion coming from donor partners that are funding especially programs in water and health that are quite critical. But let me also take this opportunity, Honorable Speaker, to ask our governors, both those who are serving their second term and those who have just been elected to serve their first term, that in the past we've seen a lot of wastage, even with donor funds coming to alleviate problems in healthcare and water, and ask all our governors to ensure that this 17.5 billion shillings going to them, a total of almost 23 billion, does not go to waste. I have seen a number of the new governors do a lot of good work, Honorable Speaker, especially in being able to rationalize staffing levels in their counties to make sure that their wage bills come down, to ensure that more money that is going to them from the national government goes towards development expenditure, Honorable Speaker. And I want to encourage them, particularly seeing the new governor for Kisii, who is a former member of parliament, and probably say something about members who have served in this house moving on to become governors, because they have been appropriating money to the counties. They know what it takes to ensure there is prudent utilization of public funds. And I want to commend the governor for Kisii and quite a number of other governors that I've seen do some good work in being able to rationalize expenditures in their counties. And I want to encourage others to follow suit, Honorable Speaker. Quite disturbing also are incidents in the recent few days in between governors and their assemblies, Honorable Speaker. And I want to also use this opportunity to plead to governors, especially the first-time governors, Honorable Speaker. I know when you get the term, Your Excellency, at times it tends to get to your head, and you don't listen to other leaders. And you want to belittle MCAs who are legislators in the county assemblies. Let us also speak to our governors and ask them to borrow a leaf from our president, who consults, who continuously engages with members of parliament in our parliamentary group meetings, Honorable Speaker, and even outside parliamentary group meetings like in the Hustler Fund launch yesterday, that our governors may be able to borrow a leaf and engage with their county assemblies, both formally and informally, so that we see seamless flow of services to the people of Kenya without unnecessary squabbles, as we have seen in a number of counties. And a few others, Honorable Speaker, that we can already see smoke billowing somewhere. And very soon there might be trouble in a number of counties out of the attitude of a number of governors, Honorable Speaker. I don't want to get into the business of mentioning names, but I think they all know themselves and they better shape up before they are shipped out by MCAs. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I beg to second.
Honorable members, I have confirmed that we have the requisite quorum in the House for the purposes of making I now propose the question, which is that the county government's additional allocations number 2 bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2022 be now read a third time. I've confirmed the requisite quorum, and therefore I now put the question, which is that the county government's additional allocations, number 2 bill, and Senate Bill number 4 of 2022 be now read a third time. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it.
A bill for an act of parliament to provide for additional allocations to county 2022-2023 financial year, the responsibilities of the national government and county governments pursuant to such allocations and for connected purposes. Order number 11, motion, approval of nominees to various national government constituency development fund committees.
Chairperson for the Select Committee on National Government Constituencies Development Fund, Honorable Sirma.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Section 43.4 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act 2015 and paragraph 5(2) and 10 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Regulations 2016, this House approves the list of nominees for appointment of the following 2 constituencies committee of the National Government Constituency Development Fund laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. Madam Speaker, the 2 constituencies were new, which have come in, and we laid them on the table yesterday, and that is Ndiwa constituency and Isiolo South. Madam Speaker, all the others we have been able to finalize. So therefore, we have only a balance of about 3 constituencies which have not submitted, Madam Speaker, and I wish to urge those other members to ask their fund managers to expedite the process so that we may be at par in terms of the procedure we are doing. Madam Speaker, I beg to move. Microphone. I beg to ask Honorable Kiarie to second the motion.
Madam Speaker, I do recognize that time is of essence, and noting the import of the motion that...
Section 43.4 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act of 2015 and paragraphs 5.2 and 10 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Regulations 2016, this House approves the list of nominees for the appointment to the following 2 constituency committees of the National Constituency Development Fund laid on the table of this House on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022, as listed in pages 543 and 542 to 543 of the today's order paper. Will as many as, okay. I now put the question that pursuant to the provisions of Section 43.4 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act of 2015 and paragraphs 5.2 and 10 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Regulations 2016, this House approves the list of nominees for the appointment to the following 2 constituency committees of the National Government Constituency Development Fund laid on the table of this House on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022, as listed in pages 543 to 542 and 500 to 543 of as set out in today's order paper. Will as many of that opinions say aye? Aye. Will as many as of those of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Honorable members, I think we should continue to receive the reports from the various committees as they become readily available. I now call upon the Honorable Nelson Koech, Departmental Committee for Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations. Seems he's not here. We are now call upon the Honorable Samuel Chepkonga, Chairperson, Committee on Delegated Legislation.
Honorable Speaker, on behalf of the Chair of the Committee on Delegated Legislation, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, December 1st, 2022, morning sitting. Report on the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the adjustment of export levy for inflation made under the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act Regulation 2022, Legal Notice number 203 of 2022. 2. Report on the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the adjustment of rates of excess duty for inflation regulation 2022, legal notice number 204 of 2022. Number 3, Madam Speaker, report of the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the statutory instruments, exemptions from expiry regulations 2022, legal notice number 214 of 2022, and report of the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the statutory instrument exemption from expiry. Number 2, regulations of 2022, legal notice number 218 of 2022. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable Leader of Majority, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, are you going to give on behalf of the chairperson? Oh. Okay, you know, just. The representative of the Honorable Chairperson for delegated legislation, you can now give notice.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice to the following motion, that this House adopts a report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the adjustment of rates of export levy for inflation regulation 2022 laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of the Section 15(4) of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013, approves the adjustment of rates of export levy for inflation regulation published as legal notice number 177 of 2022. Additionally, Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the adjustment of rates of excise duty for inflation regulation 2022 laid on the table of this House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of the Section 10(3) of the Excise Duty Act 2015, approves the adjustment of rates of excise duty for inflation regulation 2022 published as legal notice number 176 of 2022. Additionally, Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the statutory instruments exemption from expiry regulations 2022 laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of the Section 21(2) of the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013, approves the statutory instrument exemption from expiry regulation 2022 published as legal notice number 214 of 2022. And finally, Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the statutory instrument exemption from expiry number 2, regulations 2 of 2022 laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of this section of Section 21(2) of the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013, as read together with the revisions of Law Act Cap 1, approves the statutory instrument exemption from expiry number 2 regulations 2022 published as legal notice number 218 of 2022. Thank you, Chair. Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Member Nelson Koech, Chairperson, Departmental Committee on Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations, can lay the paper and give your notice of motion. Okay, we can move to the next person. The Honorable James Gakuya, Chairperson for Departmental Committee on Trade, Industry and Cooperatives.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, let me take this opportunity to lay the following papers on the table of the House today. Reports of the Departmental Committee on Trade, Industry and Cooperatives on nominees for appointments of principal secretaries. One, Mr. Alfred K. Obudo, State Department for Trade. Mr. Abubakar Hassan, State Department for Investment Promotion. Mr. Juma Makwana, State Department for Industry. Mr. Patrick Kiburi Kiremi, State Department for Comparatives. 5, Mrs. Susan Mongeni, State Department for MSC's Department. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
You may give your notice of motion.
Honorable Speaker, I see your indulgence whether I can proceed by. Honorable Speaker, let me give notice motion for appointment of principal secretaries. Madam Speaker, that taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Trade, Industry and Cooperatives in the report on vetting on nominees for appointment of principal secretaries laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, December 1, 2022, and pursuant on the provisions of Article 155, 3B of the Constitution, approves the appointment of the following persons as principal secretaries. 1, Mr. Alfred Kobudo, State Department of Trade. 2, Mr. Abubakar Hassan, State Department for Investment Promotion. 3, Mr. Juma Makwana, State Department for Industry. 4, Mr. Patrick Buri Kilemi, State Department for Comparatives. And 5, Ms. M.S. Susan Mangeni, State Department for MSCE Development. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Report on the Department Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining on the vetting of the following nominees for appointment as principal secretaries. Engineer Festus Kipkoech Ngeno, State Department for Environment. 2, Mr. Ephantas Kimodo Kimani, State Department for Forestry. 3, Mr. Elijah Gitumbu Mwangi, State Department for Mining. Honorable Speaker, I also beg to appointment of a principal secretary to give notice of motion that's taking into consideration the finding of the Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining in its report on the vetting of nominees for appointment as principal secretary laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155, 3, subsection B of the Constitution, approves the appointment of the following persons as principal secretaries. 1, Engineer Festus Kipkoech Ngeno, State Department for Environment. 2, Mr. Ephantas Kimodo Kimani, State Department for Forestry. And 3, Mr. Elijah Gitumbu Mwangi, State Department for Mining. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
You may move the motion. The Honorable Joash Nyamoko, Departmental Committee on Lands.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Report of the Departmental Committee on Lands on the vetting of Honorable Nixon Correll for the appointment as Principal Secretary, State Department for Lands and Fiscal Planning. Madam Speaker, I'll continue to give the notice of motion. For the appointment of Principal Secretary, the State Department of Lands and Fiscal Planning, that taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Lands in its reports on the vetting of nominee for appointment as Principal Secretary, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155, 3B of the Constitution, approves the appointment of Honorable Nixon Correll as the Principal Secretary, State Department of Lands and Fiscal Planning. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The Honorable Sir George Murugara, the Chairperson, Justice, Legal Affairs, and Legal Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Reports of the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs on, number 1, petitions for the removal from office of Juliana Cherera, Irene Masit, Justice Nyang'aya, and Francis Wanderi as commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC. Number 2, the vetting of Ms. Mary Muthoni Muriuki for appointment as Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You may proceed to give notice.
Madam Speaker, allow me to give notice of the following motion. That this House considers and adopts the report of the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs on the petitions by the Republican Liberty Party, Reverend Dennis Ndwega Ndumbe, Mr. Geoffrey Lagat, and Mr. Ogwo Steve Jerry, seeking the removal of 4 specified commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 251(3) of the Constitution, number 1, finds that A, the petition by the Republican Liberty Party discloses serious violations of the Constitution or other laws as a ground for removal of Ms. Juliana Woge Cherera, Ms. Irene Cherop Maset, Mr. Francis Mathenge Wanderi, and Mr. Justice Abonyo Nyang'aya as commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. B, that the petition by Reverend Dennis Ndwega Ndumbe discloses serious violations of the Constitution or other laws, gross misconduct, and incompetence as grounds for the removal of Ms. Juliana Wonge Cherera, Ms. Irene Cherop Maset, and Mr. Francis Mathenge Wanderi, and Mr. Justice Abonyo Nyang'aya as commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Number C, that the petition by Geoffrey Langat discloses serious violations of the Constitution or other laws, gross misconduct, and incompetence as grounds for the removal of Ms. Juliana Wonge Cherera, Ms. Irene Cherop Maset, Mr. Francis Mathenge Deritu, and Mr. Justice Abonyo Nyang'aya as commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Number D, that the petition by Ogwo Steve Jerry discloses serious violations of the Constitution or other laws, gross misconduct, and incompetence as grounds for removal of Ms. Juliana Wonge Cherera, Ms. Irene Cherop Maset, Mr. Francis Mathenge Wanderi, and Mr. Justice Abonyo Nyang'aya as commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Number 2, the House resolves, 1, that the petitions herein, together with the material in support thereof, be sent to His Excellency the President pursuant to Article 251(3) of the Constitution. Number 2, that His Excellency the President appoints a tribunal to deal with the matters in accordance with Article 251(5) of the Constitution. And number 3, that His Excellency the President suspends the commissioners herein pending the determination by the tribunal. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of this motion that, taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs in its report on the vetting of a nominee for appointment as Principal Secretary and laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155(3)(b) of the Constitution, approves the appointment of Ms. Mary Muthoni Morioki as Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Gabriel Tongoya, Chairperson, Committee on Administration and Internal Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Thursday, 1st of December 2022. The report of the Departmental Committee on Administration and Internal Affairs on the vetting of the following nominees for appointment as Principal Secretaries. 1, Mr. Julius Korir, State Department for Cabinet Affairs. 2, Ms. Aurelia Rono, State Department for Parliamentary Affairs. 3, Dr. Raymond Omolo, State Department for Interior and National Administration. 4, Ambassador Professor Julius Bitok, State Department for Citizen Services. And 5, Ms. Esther Ngero, State Department for Performance and Delivery Management. At the same time, Madam Speaker, I want to give notice of motion on that, taking into consideration the finding of the Departmental Committee on Administration and Internal Affairs in its report on the vetting of nominees for appointment as Principal Secretaries, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provision of Article 155(3)(b) of the Constitution, approve the appointment of the following person as Principal Secretaries: Mr. Julius Korir, State Department for Cabinet Affairs; Ms. Aurelia Rono, State Department for Parliamentary Affairs; Dr. Raymond Omolo, State Department for Interior and National Administration; Ambassador Professor Julius Bitok, State Department for Citizen Services; and Ms. Esther Ngero, State Department for Performance and Delivery Management. Should it be seconded? I ask Mheshimiwa Wanyama to second.
It's not necessary. Yeah. The Honorable Daniel Wanyama, Chairperson for Departmental Committee on Sports and Culture.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Report of the Departmental Committee on Sports and Culture on the vetting of the following nominees for appointment as Principal Secretaries: Mr. Jonathan Mwangangi Mweke, State Department for Sports and the Arts, and Ms. Umi Mohammed Bashir, State Department for Culture and Heritage. And at the same time, Honorable Speaker, I give notice of the motion that, taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Sports and Culture in the report on the vetting of nominees for appointment as Principal Secretaries, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provision of Article 155(3)(b) of the Constitution, approves the appointment of the following persons as Principal Secretaries: Mr. Jonathan Mwangangi Mweke, State Department for Sports and the Arts, and Ms. Umi Mohammed Bashir, State Department for Culture and Heritage. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
The Honorable Eric Mushangi, Chairperson, Departmental Committee on Labor.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Report of the Departmental Committee on Labor on the vetting of the following nominees for appointment Development, and 2, Mr. Amos Gadesha, State Department for Public Service. At the same time, Honorable Speaker, I wish to give a notice of motion on the appointment of principal secretaries. That taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Labor in its report on the vetting of nominees for appointment as principal secretaries, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, Article 155, 3B of the Constitution, approves the appointment of the following persons as principal secretaries. 1, Mr. Geoffrey Kaituku, State Department for Labor and Skills Development, and Department for Labor and Skills Development, and 2, Mr. Amos Gadesha, State Department for Public Service. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
What's your point of order? Honorable Chairperson. Eric Mushangi, you may notice of motion. Okay, so Sergeant Tams, maybe you can ring the bell for another 10 minutes. Honorable members, kindly do not leave. You have called for quorum, so I think it's... yeah. And could the whips kindly try and get members to come in? We now have a quorum, so we may proceed. The Honorable George Kariuki, Chairperson for the Departmental Committee on Transport and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. This is the report of the Departmental Committee on Transport and Infrastructure on vetting of following nominees for appointment as principal secretaries. 1, Mr. Joseph Mungai Bogua, State Department for Roads. 2, Mr. Mohamed Daga, State Department for Transport. And 3, Mr. Shadrach Mwandime, State Department for Shipping and Maritime Affairs. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
You may proceed to give notice of motion.
Honorable Speaker, I wish to give notice of motion for the appointment of principal secretaries, that taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Transport and Infrastructure in its report on the vetting of nominee for appointment as principal secretaries, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155(3)(b) of the Constitution, approves the appointment of the following persons as principal secretaries. 1, Mr. Joseph Mungai Bogua, State Department for Roads. 2, Mr. Mohamed Daga, State Department for Transport. And 3, Mr. Shadrach Mwandime, State Department for Shipping and Maritime Affairs. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Nelson Koech, Chairperson for the Departmental Committee on Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the House today, Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Report of the Departmental Committee of Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations on vetting of the following nominees for appointment as principal secretaries. Mr. Patrick Mariru, State Department of Defense, number 1. Number 2, Dr. Abraham Korir Arap Singoe, State Department of Foreign Affairs. Number 3, Roslyn Kathure Njogu, State Department for Diaspora Affairs. And number 4, Abdi Dubat Fido, State Department for East African Communities. That taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations in this, its report on the vetting of nominees for appointment as principal secretaries, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, December 1st, 2022, and pursuant to provisions of Article 155, sub-Article 3B of the Constitution, approves the appointment of the following persons as principal secretaries. Number 1, Patrick Mariru, State Department of Defense. Number 2, Dr. Abraham Kipkorir, State Department for Foreign Affairs. Number 3, Ms. Roslyn Jogu, State Department for Diaspora Affairs. And number 4, Mr. Abdi Dabat Fido, State Department for East African Community Affairs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Next order.
Order number 13, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 42 of 2022, second reading.
Leader of Majority.
Honorable Speaker, thank you, Honorable Speaker. The business listed as order number 13 on the independent election, we had requested that this be rescheduled to this afternoon once JLAC have finished, and I'll be back on the issues pertaining to NGCDF and GAF. I know many of our members are very apprehensive, Honorable Speaker, on the issues of GAF and NGCDF.